Hi there, Kay here, and I'm going to be taking you through Module 7 on addictions. So let's bring up my PowerPoint presentation now. And let's put that onto slideshow for everybody. Okay, there you go. So component 5, abuse and addictions, and we're doing Module 7, addiction. So addictions are extreme self-defeating behaviours. Let's look at the standards that we need to meet. So, to understand addiction issues, you'll be able to summarise and discuss similarities and differences between behavioural addictions such as gambling and substance addictions such as alcohol or drug addiction, and discuss ethical issues around level of competence when offering assistance to clients with addiction issues, and give an example of a process of therapy for a client with addiction issues using a pluralistic approach. And section 4, be able to evaluate your own practice. So, as usual, reviewing and reflecting on your practice in class and on your placement, and reflect on your training in relation to balancing client safety with maintaining a confidential and supportive relationship with a client. So, recent research from neuroscience is leading to an understanding that the neurological changes in the brains of people who engage in behaviours such as gambling or binge eating are similar to the brains of those who abuse substances such as drugs and alcohol. Addiction is a challenging and complex area, and you need to always be thinking about your own competence levels when working in this field. Some of the things that we might get addicted to then, I mean, there's lots, isn't there? So drugs, alcohol, caffeine, chocolate, that's my one. Food, spending, shopping, pornography, sex, gambling, internet, mobile phones, hoarding. But today we're going to be looking at substance addiction and process addiction. So what is process addiction? Well, it's defined as any compulsive-like behaviour that interferes with normal living and causes significant negative consequences in the person's family, work, or social life. And there's also growing understanding that issues such as OCD share common characteristics with process addictions. So these addictions don't involve substances. And we know that failure to overcome an addiction is really common. And even with strong family support and other support, success rates vary. And it depends on the type of addiction and the treatment involved. But for many people, addiction is an ongoing illness, and relapse is very common. And environment has a large part to play in it. We know that people who have lived with addictive parents are more at risk, and that's genetically and environmentally. And many addicts have more than one addictive behaviour. So the idea in therapy is that they're all addressed. But of course, just changing one addictive behaviour is really difficult. So trying to change several is going to be a real challenge. So let's define addictions. So we've got substance dependency, where there's neurobiological changes. So taking things like alcohol, heroin, painkillers, antidepressants, where the body has adapted to regular exposure. to the substance. And then there's dependency on non-addictive substances. So actually amphetamines and cannabis and cocaine are not physically addictive, but people feel like they're addicted to them. It's psychological, it's in their head. They feel that need. And then there's process addictions where there's no substance involved, but there is changes, neurobiological changes, and there's an addictive pattern which creates negative consequences. And then there's non-addictive behaviours. So people do take substances, but they're maybe not addicted to them. It's just occasional. And there's social gambling and social drinking. The behaviour is not a compulsion, and therefore it doesn't interfere with day-to-day life. So let's look at the use of substances. And the DSM refers to, not to addiction, but to substance use disorder. And for diagnosis of this, symptoms such as impaired control and how much or how often the substance is taken, how much time is taken up to obtain the substance, use and recover from that use, and how strong the cravings are, and how many desired or necessary social activities are given up in favour of the substance, are all things that will be considered. And how do we distinguish substance abuse from dependency? So substance abuse is the misuse of illegal and legal drugs, including alcohol, on a regular basis. And this can include illegal substances like heroin and cocaine and ecstasy, but it's also the abuse of prescription drugs. And substance abuse is voluntary, whereas if an individual feels that compulsion, that strong internal compulsion to use a drug, then substance abuse is termed as dependency. So not all people who abuse substances do so because they're dependent. A lot of young people start doing it because of their peers, and often we start smoking, having the odd drink, maybe using cannabis, and it can just be part of a youth culture, and many of those youths will grow out of it. It's just a phase in their life. And worldwide, some drugs are legal, whereas in other places they're not. So substance abuse isn't as simple as a drug being legal or illegal. And we can be physically addicted to something or psychologically addicted to something. So let's look at that a bit more. So physical dependence may occur with the regular use of a substance, and legal or illegal. We build up a tolerance as well, which I'll go into in a bit. And that physical dependence occurs because the body naturally adapts to the regular exposure to a substance. And when the substance is taken away, symptoms can emerge while the body readjusts to the loss of the symptoms. And physical dependence can lead to craving the drug to relieve those withdrawal symptoms. And with some drugs, the withdrawal symptoms can be very severe and distressing. Now, psychological addictions are seen where there's a dependency in the mind of the person. So it's not a need to prevent the unpleasant side effects from withdrawal from a substance. So for example, with cannabis, it's not physically addictive. So someone can stop taking it. They won't actually get nasty withdrawal symptoms, but they will still often crave the substance, but it's a psychological thing, it's in their head. And these types of addiction usually start as a need to reduce feelings of anxiety or isolation. So addictions of all sorts can ruin lives and destroy families. And people with addictions will continue to use their chosen drug or behaviour, even when it's apparent that it's not in their best interests and not good for their health. And people will use all sorts of excuses to carry on. They might be in denial, they may rationalise it, minimise it, or project blame onto others. And many people can change by themselves and with help from family and friends. And as I said earlier, some young people just mature and grow out of it. But some people can't. And there's various types of support available. And counselling may support someone's decision to change alongside other support. And other support might be from the GP, and the GP can give advice and make referral and sometimes prescribe drugs to ease withdrawal symptoms. And there's also referral to local NHS addiction units, including residential ones. There's self-referral to private rehab centres. And there's support groups such as AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, or Narcotics Anonymous. And there's also specialist charities that can help, such as GAM Care. So working with dependency issues in counselling involves helping people that, it could be that people are in a rehabilitation setting. You could be a counsellor in a rehab setting. You could work with clients who later present with addictive behaviours. So you might start seeing them for an issue in counselling that they've come with, and then realise that actually they have got addictive behaviours. Or you may see them for something and their addictive behaviours start during the process of therapy even. And you can also maybe work with the family and friends of people with addictions, because obviously it's very distressing and difficult for family members. So they often need counselling as well. It's essential, even if you don't plan to work in the field of addiction, that you understand the issues that addiction presents for all people that are affected by it. And if you do that, then you can ensure that you're referring people on when needed, and that you recognise there's a problem and they need other help. And often people with substance dependency need medical monitoring and intervention. And for both substance and process addictions, people might need legal help and practical help, maybe financial help. So the support that you give as a counsellor should never preclude someone from receiving the extra support they need. And obviously you need to be clear on what you are qualified to offer and what you're not. We can't give debt advice and medication advice. And a drug support agency, for example, might be offering needle exchanges, legal, debt, benefit, health and housing advice, and possibly other complementary therapies. So if you're working in that type of environment, you're part of a team which is offering different support for clients with multiple needs. So let's start by looking a little bit at alcohol. So with alcohol, with alcohol dependency, there's a strong compulsion to drink, and people might drink at inappropriate times. Some will drink shortly after waking. There will be a reduced capacity to control the drinking, and they may organise their life around the drinking. Now, there's 3 million deaths each year from alcohol, and 13.5% of all deaths aged 20 to 39, which is quite high, and 5.3% of all deaths are alcohol related. And, you know, the effects of drinking too much: slurred speech, loss of coordination, unsteady walking or standing, impaired attention, impaired judgment, loss of inhibitions, sleepiness, and it reacts negatively with other drugs, especially prescribed medication like antidepressants. And the effects of it are many as well. You know, there can be restlessness and insomnia and disorientation, hallucination, elevated blood pressure, psychotic behaviour, seizures, and even death. And it's a sedative hypnotic drug that's in the same class as drugs such as barbiturates and tranquilizers, and they all have the same withdrawal symptoms, which aren't very nice. And treatment may be by detox. Sometimes medication is used that can help, and psychotherapy. And the treatment should be a holistic approach. And an alcoholic can die from sudden withdrawal, so that shouldn't happen. The effect that dependency has on a person's family is profound, and children living with alcoholic parents can be negatively affected for the rest of their lives and may need therapy to get over that. And so, as I said at the beginning, it's very important to think about your own competency levels and your limitations in this field. Now, as is the case with many substances, people develop a decreased response over time to alcohol, and this is called tolerance. So the person will need more to achieve the same feelings from it. And this can give people the false notion that they actually handle their alcohol well. They need more of it, they think they're doing okay, but actually the opposite is true. So if a person seems to be tolerant to alcohol, then it's likely they've got a problem. And because alcohol is a sedative and it's a depressant, and so it makes depression work, and yet some people use alcohol as well when they're taking antidepressants, and they react negatively together and actually make the person more depressed, even to the point of suicide. And alcohol can induce psychosis and cause personality changes, and also cause aggression. So let's take a brief look at drugs now. And there's different classes of psychoactive substances, those that affect the mind or behaviour, and they're basically put into 5 groups. So we've got opiates, and they provide pain relief and mimic endorphin production. And really anything in the morphine family, so opium, morphine, codeine, tramadol, heroin, and methadone, which is the initial treatment for heroin at times. It's a replacement drug for the heroin. And stimulants increase attention and alertness and give people more confidence, make people feel powerful. And so that's things like caffeine and amphetamines and cocaine and crack cocaine and crystal meth. And then we've got depressants, which act as a sedative and slow down brain function. They can help promote sleep and reduce anxiety. So you can understand why people take these when they're anxious, but actually long term, they don't have the necessary effects. And those are alcohol, sedatives and tranquilizers, benzodiazepines. And then we've got hallucinogens, things like magic mushrooms and LSD and ketamine. And then marijuana is in a field on its own, cannabis, skunk. And it can be a stimulant, depressant, and hallucinogen, depending on how much and how often it's used and the effects on the individual. So the effects of taking drugs vary from person to person and from drug to drug. And not all drugs are addictive, and not all people who take drugs become addicted. And addiction is complicated by many different factors about the individual. And some of the most common drugs are cannabis, cocaine, and heroin. There's a lot of debate about cannabis because it's got lots of positive effects in its pure form. It can help with pain and many illnesses. But also, if in some people, if it's used long term, it can cause mental health issues and paranoia. And the other problem is that when bought on the street, a lot of the street drugs are not pure and they're mixed with other things. Heroin is very physically addictive, and you can become addicted after just one hit. So it's a very dangerous drug to try. And it's usually injected, and some people can end up with nowhere left to inject, and they end up injecting into their feet and their groin. And the symptoms of withdrawal are pretty horrendous. And because people build up a tolerance, they need more of it to get the same effects, and they can't afford it, and they often turn to crime to fund their habit. And cocaine is a stimulant and gives someone that feeling of power. But when the effects wear off, the person feels depressed and needs more of it. And it can make people really aggressive and a bit crazy. There's too many drugs to mention, and they all have different effects on different people, and some are more dangerous than others. Rohypnol is the date rape drug that I'm sure you've all heard of, and that's had a lot of recent attention. And there's also things that are legal but can still have a really dangerous effect, such as lighter fuel, nail varnish remover, spray cans, some fertilizers, and many more things. So if you're interested in working in the field with substance addiction, you really need to know all about these different drugs and the street names, because a lot of them have got several different street names. But let's move on to look at behavioural addictions. So this is where there's an addiction present but no substance involved. And these are called process addictions and are categorised in the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Health Disorders under impulse control disorders. And so these include things such as sex, pornography, mobile phone, internet, gaming, shopping, spending, hoarding, gaming. And obviously these addictions, I mean, substance abuse obviously does as well affect finances, but with these addictions as well, it can cause financial issues, job losses, relationship breakdowns, and lead to other mental health issues, including anxiety and depression. So today we're going to focus on gambling and take a brief look at sex addiction. But there's lots of other categories to look into as well, which we won't cover today. So with gambling, it's found to be higher in more deprived countries and more deprived areas of the country. And it's highest among unemployed individuals and lowest among those who were either retired or raising a family. It's become easier to gamble because it's all over the internet, and it's also easy to obtain credit. So people can do it easily from home, whereas before they really had to go out to be able to gamble. So that's why there's been an increase in gambling and among women. It's also advertised regularly on the TV. So gambling can be divided into 4 categories, really. So we've got social gambling, and this is gambling that's done with friends and associates, and the activities last for a set length of time, and any losses are thought about and affordable to those partaking. And really, gambling can start from something as simple as the 2p games, where you put your 2p in the machine at seaside arcades, and you win lots of 2p's back, hopefully, but the money you're gambling is quite small. But when we social gamble, we do it knowing the risks, and we don't spend too much of our money. We're actually thinking about it. And then there's professional gambling. So there are professional gamblers out there, and the risks are limited, and they've got great discipline. So they wouldn't take losses that would put them in a risky financial position. And then there's problem gambling, where somebody is a bit preoccupied by it and it's taking up their time, and they fail attempts to cut down and continue to gamble even though there's negative consequences to it. And then pathological gambling, and then this is where the person experiences distortions of thinking. They may be in denial, they may become overconfident and have a sense of power or control, and they'll believe that money is the answer, and they'll be highly competitive and easily bored and restless, and they often tend to be overly generous and obsessed with work, and they will end up not being able to control their gambling. So gamblers report an excited feeling, anticipation as they contemplate the action, and then they get high while they're doing it. And obviously with gambling, there's no physical effects, and gamblers can be very secretive. So you might never know someone is a gambler. And the main effect of gambling is on finances, but that leads to possible job losses and relationship breakdowns, and possibly even the loss of a home and their security. And gamblers will often borrow money, which can make the situation worse. And it can have a devastating effect on their friends and family. And it's linked with guilt and shame and suicide. So there's 4 phases as well. So there's the winning phase. And this is where the action gives a buzz and the person is excited by winning. It makes them feel powerful and in control. And they think they can continue to win. And there'll be an increase in the frequency, and the need for it increases. So they get a big high and it makes them feel powerful, and then they need to do it again. And the amount of money they spend will increase. And the optimism that they feel will be out of proportion to the bet. And they may brag about their winnings. And this phase can go on for a while. But of course, at some point, there's going to be a loss. And that might not be predicted. And the person can't stop gambling because they always believe they'll get their money back. And they may start to borrow money. And they might start to hide their losses. Other parts of their lives might start to become affected, and they might even start having personality changes. And that's when the desperation phase starts, because they may be in debt and not able to pay off them debts. They may even start illegal or immoral activity to obtain money. And their problem may become common knowledge, and they may alienate friends and family. And at this stage, they might start to seek help if they're motivated enough. But stage 4 is helplessness, and this is where the person doesn't really know what to do. They're at that stage where the debt has really built up. Maybe they've remortgaged their house, their partner's threatening to chuck them out, they've told lots of lies and hidden things, and depression can set in. They could have an emotional breakdown, and there's even the possibility of suicidal thoughts and attempts. And they could also be in trouble with the law at this point. So it's reported that 10 to 15% of people who are receiving treatment for substance abuse also have a problem with gambling. And alongside this, some 47% of pathological gamblers have an addiction with alcohol or drugs. So they are connected. And again, we need to think about our limitations if we want to work in this field. And many gamblers also need legal, debt, and other practical help. Let's take a little look at sex addiction. So with sex addiction, there is a loss of control over their fantasies and behaviour. Increased frequency and intensity of sexual thoughts and behaviours over a period of time. And there can be significant time lost in fantasy. The involvement in normal social activities then reduces, and someone can become irritable, isolate themselves, have a low mood, lack of empathy, and relationship issues start. They experience a neurochemical high when fantasizing or preparing for a sexual act, and also almost get trance-like feelings. They may have shallow breathing and rapid heartbeat and perspire, and there's a sense of euphoria, and they can detach from negative feelings. And sex addiction can happen with anyone, really. So it doesn't matter whether you're gay, straight, male, female, what your race or culture is, what your social class is. It can happen with single people, people in a relationship, a parent, with or without children. And it doesn't have to be related to paraphilia, and it's not related to sexual offences, although it can be. And you know, some of the behaviours can be seeking out and having sex regardless of potential consequences, wanting multiple partners, seeing prostitutes, dangerous sexual acts, compulsive masturbation, an obsession with pornography, can be flashing at people. So there's lots of different behaviours. And again, it's a process addiction. And all of these addictions somehow meet a need in someone. Something is missing in their life, and they're trying to meet that need. Let's look at the addictive process. So there will have been negative past experiences, and that could be childhood emotional abuse or sexual abuse, attachment issues, or physical abuse, for example. And so there'll be underlying emotional issues. The person will have a negative schema, negative beliefs, and automatic negative thoughts. And they'll have low self-esteem and possibly depression and anxiety. And the feelings they're trying to avoid are tension and emptiness, a sense of restlessness. They feel a need to have a respite from those feelings. And the experience they're really looking for is that trance-like feeling, to be able to disassociate from negative thoughts and feelings. And, you know, that strong feeling they get, that buzz they get from the anticipation of a win or a pleasant act, they can almost lose themselves in it. And so they want to stay in that as long as possible to get that excitement, that feeling. So it's like an escape for them. They want to feel pleasure. And it sort of replaces the emotional attachment that maybe they haven't got. So the neurological understanding of addictive processes offers us an explanation of why and how these addictive patterns occur where there is no addictive substance involved. And the process seems to involve three functional systems in the brain that relate to motivation, reward, regulation of emotions, and inhibition of behaviour. So when our motivation reward system is impaired, it creates states of irritable tension, emptiness, and restlessness. And people with addictions of all kinds, substances or behavioural, struggle with underlying emotional issues. There are often struggles with other dependencies and issues such as anxiety, low self-esteem, depression, or other self-defeating behaviours. And just as we could say that addiction is a dysfunctional behaviour, we can also say that it's a highly functional behaviour, in that for many, their addiction has a specific function, whether that's making them feel more confident or less inhibited, or being able to avoid certain situations. So as we learned in year 2 of our studies, the behaviour has generally at some point been beneficial to the person in the short term. Studies of addiction treatment have found that the therapeutic alliance makes a key difference to positive outcome, regardless of different treatments. You know, it's that relationship that is so important. And the pluralistic approach also emphasises the client's ability to take control and do things for themselves. These qualities are perhaps the most important factors of all in success. And the success needs to be defined by the client, not by the therapist. So what we want for our client might not be the same as what they want. Now, one of the models that is used in addiction treatment is this process of change here. And this is seen as a circle, sometimes called the cycle of change. And relapse is included here so that people are aware that it's a possibility, even after a period of maintaining change. And people move both forwards and backwards around this cycle and will spend varying amounts of time in each stage. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. So in pre-contemplation at the top here, somebody is really, they've got no intention of changing their behaviour. Maybe they're still enjoying life. Maybe they're in denial, not yet ready to face the fact that it's a problem, or not at a low enough point yet. So it's unlikely that somebody would come to therapy at this stage unless they're pressured by someone else. And if they're not ready, then it probably won't be helpful. If we move round, we've then got the contemplation stage, and this is where somebody realises that they've got a problem and they're thinking that change could be beneficial, but they haven't got any commitment yet. And at this stage, therapy could be useful, and it would be about helping them look at the costs and rewards of changing or not changing. They may change their mind frequently. They may think they want to change and then they'll, no, maybe I won't. And, you know, support at this point is quite helpful. And then we move on to the preparation stage. And this is where they can see the benefits of change outweigh the costs of continuing. And so they start making preparation plans. They might need help looking at knowledge and skills they have and coping mechanisms so that they can make a plan of action. And then the next stage is taking that action, doing things differently. And that can involve avoiding certain people and places. And they really need clear goals to be able to carry that action out. And then's the maintenance phase. Now, this is when the person has reached the stage when they've broken the old habits and new patterns of behaviour are emerging. And once these patterns have become established, then the person can be seen as moving into a slightly safer period where they're less likely to relapse, but they need to be able to maintain it for a certain amount of time. And that maintenance phase can be a really long struggle for a lot of people. Staying clean is so difficult, and people will say it's more difficult than actually stopping the behaviour. So maintaining is more difficult. And relapse is common. And so that's why it's the next stage, where people fall back into their old patterns of behaviour. And this might be because maybe an old friend has turned up who has a similar behaviour and encourages them. Maybe they're going through a really stressful time. They've got other stresses that are affecting them, and so they relapse. Now, attitude in this phase is really important, because someone can either tell themselves, okay, so I've had a couple of drinks tonight, but I can get straight back on the wagon tomorrow. Or they can say, oh, well, I've had a couple of drinks tonight, that's it, I've blown it, I might as well just carry on. So attitude is really important there. And I'm sure some of us know how this feels. I've done that. I've told myself I'm not going to eat chocolate, and then I've gone past the shop and thought, oh, I could just eat a bar of chocolate, ate it, then felt bad, and instead of thinking, oh well, that's it, I'm going straight back on it, I think, oh well, I might as well go and have another bar. So relapse is difficult for people, but it can also be useful, because you can help a client to identify the triggers that made them relapse, the feelings, the thoughts, the situations they were in that led to that relapse. And obviously a client needs to have support through this time. There is the possibility that a client may stop attending therapy because they feel like they've let themselves down, they've let you down, or because they've just gone straight back to their old ways, and they need to get back to that contemplation stage where they think about change again. So one of the things that we can use is motivational interviewing. So this is a tool that's used in prisons and by the probation service, and it's similar to person-centered therapy in some ways. So we need to express empathy. So we're really listening, and we're trying to convey our understanding of the client's issues and their motivations and points of view. But we're then developing discrepancy. And this is really looking at how what the client wants is different from their behaviour. We're looking at their deeply held values, and we're trying to tease out ways in which their current unhealthy behaviours conflict with that wish to change and to be better. So there's a discrepancy between where the client is and where they want to be, and we're bringing that up. We're sidestepping resistance. So we don't confront the client when the client's resistant. We try and respond with empathy and understanding. And if what we're doing doesn't work, then we try something else. And it's really important to support the client's self-efficacy. So we're building their confidence that change is possible. We're supportive and encouraging them. And we're trying to raise their sense of self-worth and their belief that they can succeed. And helping the client to gain knowledge of their condition can help motivate the client to change. we also use positive restructuring, which is looking at the positives. So, for example, a client may say that they've relapsed and had 3 drinks that night, and they've blown their chances of success. And we can say, well, you only had 3 drinks. You could have had more. And you've come back to therapy, where you might not have come back. You might have gone straight back to your old habits, and you haven't. You're here. So we're looking at the positives, and we might remind them that, you know, they've got this far and they can carry on again. So we're encouraging and we're supportive. And many clients find self-help groups really useful, such as the AA or the NA, Narcotics Anonymous, or Alcoholics Anonymous, and helpful to maintain a healthy lifestyle once change is made. And there's also services for gamblers and other behaviours. So let's look at how everything fits into our pluralistic approach. So we've talked about the importance of therapeutic relationship, and we'll be using those person-centered core conditions to help build that therapeutic relationship. Using the process models, so Rogers' stages of change in person-centered and the cycle of change that we've just looked at can be really helpful. And the motivational interviewing that we've just talked about. And structured and goal-focused techniques, so cognitive behavioural therapy and putting in small behavioural changes is going to be really useful. And psychodynamic therapy can also come in here, because the past experiences have led to these problems in the first place, but we need to be careful with that, because our timing needs to be right. Looking back at past experiences can be very difficult for somebody, and a time when relapse is common. And it's important that they have other sources of help from different charities, and maybe medical help and the legal debt, practical help that they need. And also that they want to help themselves, and there are self-help books and techniques that can be useful. So that's it about addiction for now, but we need to look at supervision today, and supervision is so important when working with these complex issues. So as with counselling and psychotherapy, there isn't just one model of supervision, there's several. So the model below, known as the 7-eyed model, presumes that there's a minimum of 4 elements to supervision. And these are a supervisor, a supervisee, a client, and a work context. But all in all, this gives us 7 models of supervision, 7 modes of supervision. And we can explain this with the 7-eyed supervisor. So this is a process model, and on the left-hand side here, you'll see the 7 numbers representing 7 types of modes of supervision. So that can be, the focus is on the client and what the client is bringing to therapy. And the exploration of the strategies and interventions that the supervisee is using with that client, and then exploration of the relationship between the client and the supervisee. What's that relationship like? How is it between them in the room? So that's all really about the relationship between the client and the supervisee. And then we've got focus on the supervisee themselves. So was the supervisee triggered by any of the client's experiences or hooked in? How does that feel? So this is more about the supervisee's experience of the client and of what the client is bringing to therapy. And then there's the focus on the supervisory relationship. So what is happening in the relationship between the supervisor and the supervisee? Is there any parallel processes at play between that and what is going on with the client and the supervisee? And then there's the supervisor focusing on their own process, so their own self-reflection on what is occurring for them when they're with the supervisee. And then there's also the focus on the wider context in which the work happens. So ethical issues, safeguarding, referral, and other support needed. So when you take something to supervision, your supervisor might say to you, okay, tell me about the client, how the client presents, and then what's the relationship like, what's happening in the room, and what are the client's issues, and how are you working with those issues, what models and techniques of therapy are you using, and they may give you some advice and help with that. And sometimes that's where, as far as supervision goes, but it can be much more than that. And the supervisor might say, what do you think about our relationship? What's happening here? Is there any similarities between what's happening here and what's happening with you and your client in the room? And let's talk more about you and your feelings about this client, how you feel about the work and anything that the client said. Is it triggering anything for you? And then it's also about the supervisor. She might say, well, listening to that makes me feel a certain way. And the supervisor will be focusing on their own processes, reflecting if anything that you're saying is affecting her. And then, of course, also, well, is there any safeguarding issues? Does this need to be referred? Are there ethical issues to talk about here? So we've actually got those 7 different modes in supervision. And it's worth thinking about all of these next time you go to supervision. So we've covered a lot today. We've looked at substance addictions, alcohol, types of drugs, looked at process addictions, particularly gambling, and discussed how addictions may come about. We've looked at models and techniques of therapy that fit into our pluralistic approach, and we've also looked at other help a client might need. And obviously ethical issues are very important. Being aware of our own skills and experience, remembering to first refer to the GP if someone has physical symptoms, thinking about the risks of accidental overdose and the risks of suicide, and remembering that good supervision is essential from a supervisor who is experienced in this field. So that's it for today. Lots to think about. Please read your module notes thoroughly. There's lots more information in there. When you have your session with your tutor, you'll be able to ask lots more questions and clarify things you're not sure of. But for me, that's it for now. So let me stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to say cheerio from now. I'll see you at the next module. Bye.